Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your pushback channel, and thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about: is it possible for a quality education, as in to get the most kids getting the highest possible grades? Is it possible for a quality education to coexist with a teachers' union's view of the Marxist equity utopia that's always just around the next corner? So I don't think the two can coexist, but let's explore that and see where we go. Now, I'm old enough to be, I think, the last, if not the second last, batch of students to go through high school with the strictly pass or fail examination outcomes. So merit decided it absolutely. The higher the pass mark you got, then if you failed, you failed. That was it. And kids were divided into streams. So I think, depending on the size of the school, if it was a school with like a gazillion students, you might have 8 or even 9 streams in a year. If it was a smaller school or not so many, you might have 5 or 6 or whatever the case may be. So number 1 and number 2 were considered to be the most advanced students. Then you kind of had the intermediate students at 3 or 4, and then 5 or 6 would be the not so advanced students or below intermediate. And then if you had classes below that, they were generally, or they were referred to at the time as being general activity classes. So kids were encouraged to do things like, well, don't worry about mathematics or English or anything. They were really not, even in high school, it wasn't much beyond the cat sat on the mat type level English, and they were encouraged to do other things, artistic, like to draw or to paint or something like that. So it was, you could be forgiven for thinking that even in high school that you were dealing with 5-year-olds. It was just an eternal arts and crafts class, really. Justifiably so, given that these kids had years of trying to do the mathematics and all that sort of thing, and just got nowhere. And so pretty much the establishment had given up on them, and certainly in the core subjects, and were trying to see if they had talent somewhere else, music, art, that type of thing. So, and then some of them went on to art college. I remember one guy. He was, he had this like portfolio of his drawings and so on, done in charcoal and all sorts of things. He was a gifted kid. He could really sort of perceive things and shapes and proportions, and even though he couldn't add up 1 and 1, he was gifted in that area. So it doesn't mean that because someone isn't a mathematics genius, that they can't do something else. So not many of them can, but I remember this kid could. Now, I went to sort of briefly. I had some months in a school that was near a migrant area, mainly sort of Arabic type migrants. Really, at the time, there wasn't any black ones. No Asian, or 1 or 2, but the Arabic thing was, the Mediterranean basin was really the gig, particularly the Arabs, but also other things like other people like Maltese and so on, so Greek. But a lot of these people, they were illiterate peasants in their own country, or their parents were, and so this was their first exposure to what you would call a first world country, and there were assimilation issues there. But it intrigued me that the general activity class, which there were 2 actually in this particular school, they were not all, but nearly all were these Arabs who, I mean, you could, even as a kid, I could tell, they're the future prison inmates. They're training to be the prison inmates of the future, which indeed many of them were. So I was a bit of a communist sort of back in the day and later on in high school, and I had this idea that why have these streams? Shouldn't everyone be considered as equal? Which when I think back was only a kid could think with that sort of level of that level of starry-eyed absurdity. But nonetheless, as Winston Churchill once said, I think his words to the effect, if you're not a communist when you're a kid, then you've got no heart. And if you still are when you get older, you've got no brain. I mean, it's pretty much true. So I remember a teacher, and this might have been third year high school by now. I remember a teacher sort of very patiently and with much forbearance explaining it to me about how it worked. And this person would have been left-leaning, thinking back, but at least they understood what a quality education was. And they believed, as was typical of the class consciousness at the time, they believed that class social mobility could be achieved through excelling at school and in education generally, like going on to university. So that was the way to sort of break through the class barrier. And the trouble is, not many people can do it. There's just not many bright people around. I guess it's relative as well, but there's just not many bright people around. How many bright people do you remember from school? How many bright people do you remember, in the working environments that you've been in? Now, some people can transcend their lack of brain power by, they just really work hard. They really go at it, and they're really trying to improve themselves in any way they can, even though their IQ might not be up to really galloping ahead of the pack. They just work so hard, apply themselves so diligently, they can still get there. And you get some of them, but there's not many of them either. So anyway, the teacher's explaining it to me that, look, it's like this. If we put the bright kids, this is assuming my views of a collectivist, everyone's in the one class type thing. If we put the bright kids in, I'm paraphrasing now, but put the bright kids in with the dumb kids, then the bright kids don't try as hard because they're surrounded by dumb kids. So they just do enough to come first, but they don't need to do that much because everyone around them so dumb. So now on the reverse side, the kids in the middle that probably could do better if they tried a bit harder, studied a bit harder, and paid more attention, that sort of thing. They tend to drop back because they can't compete with the brighter kids. The dumb kids, on the other hand, think they've got no chance at all. So they don't even bother. Why should they? Everyone around them is smarter than they are. And so they're never going to come first or 10th or anything like that. So they tend to make even less effort than they otherwise would. And, the competitive spirit sort of is something that the teacher mentioned, that if you get all the brighter kids together in one class, then, they get competitive. And so they actually push themselves to do better than they otherwise would because they're surrounded by other brighter kids. So there are bright kids that don't like coming second or third or something like that. So they think, well, gee whiz, I want to come first out of a class of bright kids. And so they hit the books really hard and study their asses off and pay extra attention in class and pester their folks to get them a coach and all this sort of thing. So this is something that this competitive spirit, this desire to do better, the desire to improve. Maybe it's even to they want to, their folks are writing them, so why didn't you come first, and that sort of, so there can be all sorts of other factors at play as well in the matrix there. But this idea of working, doing better is relative to the kids around you. So this is what the teacher was trying to explain to me, which is a third year high school student. I didn't really get. I kind of got it, but not fully. As I understand it now, I have a much broader understanding of what the teacher was trying to tell me. So so by separating off the bright kids, you get the bright kids to do better. But the dumb kids, or the less gifted, if you want to call them that, they don't feel the future and the situation is hopeless because they've got no really bright kids around to make them look stupid and dumb. The same with the kids in the intermediate group. I mean, I straddled the middle of the intermediate and the advanced. Advanced in some subjects and intermediate in others. But I'm not sure the competitive thing in that strict sense ever sort of really got to me. I just accepted there were brighter kids than me. I didn't sort of think, well, wow, I'm hard done by because those kids are brighter. I don't ever remember thinking that. But I remember thinking there were kids going, wow, I mean, how could you be that dumb? You get zero in the exam. Yeah, I remember thinking things like that. There were kids who actually got zero in the exam. Can you believe it? But moving away from that school with a heavy migrant area, that heavy migrant population that I was in, not for long, only months, but even so. And then, in an area that was sort of upper, I guess you call upper middle class, there wasn't everyone was white Anglo-Saxon, and I'm thinking ahead now. May have been a couple of brown kids out of like 1,000 students, but it was pretty much homogenous white, and compared to the other school, that was far less violent. Everyone was much better behaved, and so on. And the difference, in the heavy migrant school, if the teacher would say to a misbehaving student, we're going to contact your parents, we're going to tell your father what what you've been up to, and setting fire into something in the classroom. And well, if you get hold of dad, tell him to get fucked from me. And the disrespect for authority, for all sorts of things, was just, the kids kind of didn't care. That actually more came from the white kids' disrespect. Some of the brown kids did have family respect, but nothing outside of it. For example, they would respect the village elder that had come from Lebanon or something far more than they would respect the local police. It struck me as quite odd that they didn't respect any authority outside of the family and their racial diaspora. In fact, you still see that today in the black populations or the Pacific Islander populations. It's the same thing today as it was then. So. But in the upper middle class school, if the teacher said if the class was misbehaved, which would be the height of the misbehaviour in the homogenous white school was shooting paper aeroplanes around the classroom or something. It was very low level compared to the other place. but nonetheless, again, the relative thing comes in. If the teacher came and said, do we have your father's work phone number on file? And that's all they had to say. I mean, that was the equivalent to setting off a nuclear blast, for goodness sake. All they had to do was say, do we have your father's work phone number on file? And every kid there, suddenly there was this silence would descend on the class as every kid would contemplate the thought of the school saying, Mr. Smith, Billy Bob's been misbehaving. Can we see you again? As every kid contemplated the shame and the humiliation and the whatever else there, and the whole class would descend into absolute silence, and the teacher had total control from that point onwards. Nobody was going to step out of line, and that goes to show you the difference. It also is an illustration of why governments move to vigorously and rigidly and aggressively control the white people, particularly those sort of white people, because they know they can. Those people, those people understand the rules. They understand how to abide by the rules. They understand good behaviour. The other people don't. You want to get yourself a huge uproar, then try and control those other people in the same way. So that governments and the authorities, they go for the easy stuff. Nonetheless, coming back to the thing there, this idea of quality education and equity. The same thing now occurs, not so much in class, but the area of race. Can you mix races together when they're of different academic ability? Now, the way they got around that, and they were starting to do it when I was at school, it was starting to come in, was to say, well, look, we'll just give dispensations to the black kids who aren't as bright, so we can get equal outcomes with the white kids. And then we'll get equal outcomes between the genders and equal outcomes between the transgenders and all this sort of thing. So they'd set that they had this view that we'll let the brightest white kids go and do their thing. We'll still let that happen, But what we'll do is we'll just add fantasy grades to all the other, whether it be race, gender, or anything else. We'll just add fantasy grades in there to give them the pretense that they're this illusion, the fantasy that they're coming first equally with the white kids or with the boys or whatever. So with the brightest kids, so you can have a student, the proverbial black lesbian with an IQ of 80 who's getting about the same grades as the straight white male bright kid who's the mathematical genius. And so this idea was, well, we can't make it equal. We want to make it equal. We try to make it equal. Nothing we do actually works where we have any basis in reality. So we'll just create a fantasy, and then we'll create equity and equality, or quality of outcome that way. So really, the kids who are getting 0 in the exam and 5% in the exam, they're still getting that today. That's nothing's changed. Kids are no brighter today than they were then. In fact, if anything, given the reduction in the rigor of education, I'd say they're quite a bit dumber today than they are then. But nonetheless, as I was sort of finishing the high school thing, they were starting in the lower forms to introduce these fantasy grades, so that you would find every student out of 150 students in that year, that every student would get a grade, a mark of between 55 and 70. Every single student would fall into that band. Like, yeah, right. So really, the kids that were doing badly, would still be doing badly today. They just give them a very generous dispensation type fantasy mark or grade to get them into the that middle group, and have them more or less getting this. So the difference between the dumbest kid and the smartest kid isn't going to be very much. And now there are some exceptions now where they want to create poster children of again the proverbial black lesbian who got 100% in every subject. Yeah, right. So they do the poster child thing. But really, outside of that, it's all so there's no fucking strictly pass or fail grades anymore, and this is done for social engineering and equity purposes, which is a cherished goal of the radical teachers unions, of which worldwide they all seem to be radical and all seem to be running the education department and riding roughshod over any political opposition to the there are these cherished dreams of an equity and nirvana that never will exist and never can exist. But that's the thing there. The teacher was adamant that when you separate by streams, it's hardly a like as in the brightest kids and grades of class with a descending order of kids on their ability to pass or not pass exams. Once you go through these once you deviate from that, then you reduce the quality of education overall, so everybody becomes dumber as a consequence. Now, sure, it's it's hardly egalitarian, it's hardly a Marxist equity utopia to do it that way, but it does provide more bright kids. Now, the difference, you're never going to get many bright kids, so the difference may be you get 2% or 3% or 5%, let's be generous, of bright kids. And bear in mind, at the time, certainly when I was there, about 3% of kids that started high school, in year one high school, about 3% of them ended up going to university, and a third of those would drop out because it was too rigorous and too tough for them to get the grades. And also then, if you didn't pass, if you weren't passing, you had to show cause. You had to sit in front of a pretty tough tribunal that would say, well, you failed, Billy Bob. Why did you fail? And you had to show cause. There had to be that your folks were killed in the car crash. You had to produce a reason why you failed, because if you couldn't produce a reason, then it was viewed either A, you couldn't cut it, or B, you were too lazy, too stupid, or too lazy. But either way, you would have to leave the university. So you had to show cause for failure, and I knew some pretty bright kids who I thought, well, I remember one guy was doing mechanical engineering. He's a bright guy, or I thought he was, and he flunked his first year, or flunked one of the subjects, I think, in the first year, and we were sitting down having a coffee, and he was telling me he had to front this tribunal to show cause, and he was quite concerned about it, that maybe his reasons weren't going to be, wouldn't cut it, and so anyway, he fronted the tribunal, and on the basis he did well on some of the other subjects and was quite clearly a bright kid, they said, okay, well, don't worry, stay. And he did stay on, and ended up getting actually a PhD in engineering. So they only were taking the brightest kids, again, on a strictly pass or fail basis. All that has changed. You look at that university now has got an unusually high proportion of non-white people, 60%, in some cases 65%, depending on the area, are girls. If you look at adverts for the adverts online and anywhere else for universities, you'd swear there's not a single white male who attends an Australian university. All the pictures are of girls or black brown people, and if there are any white males at all, they're clearly gay, or if it is a straight white male, it's in semi-faded definition in background. So if you're walking around looking at those adverts, you think, well, gee, wow, these universities in Australia are strange. There's no straight white males there. That's how insane the fantasy world around education has become. But looking back at what the teacher was saying then, today I agree. The dividing into streams. There's never that many bright people, but the more rigorous the education is, the more bright people you will create. And the more bright people you create, even though there's still a small percentage of the population, then the more bright people there are in circulation, they're going to start businesses, invent the cure for cancer, and so on. And that is desirable for any society. And in the West today, we've completely lost that. You've been a task today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.